All right, so get ready because today we're going deep on one of history's biggest stories, Julius Caesar and the Ides of March.
Yeah,
Now, you've probably heard that phrase, but we're going way beyond just the date itself.
right.
We'll cover the historical analysis, political intrigue, and even some timeless lessons about leadership, trust, and, well, maybe a little bit of betrayal thrown into.
Of course.
And we're going to go deeper than the who, what, when, where. We're going to get into the WHY. It all still matters, even today.
And what's fascinating about Caesar's story is how it really gets at this timeless struggle
Hmm.
between ambition and power and the people who are kind of caught in the middle. It's a story that resonates just as strongly today as it did all those centuries ago.
Exactly. So before we even get to the drama of the Ides of March itself, let's start with Caesar himself. Like before he became a household name, who was this guy? And how did he actually climb the ranks in ancient Rome?
Well, Caesar's story is actually kind of, I guess you could say it's a rags to riches tale, at
Nope.
least when it comes to Roman politics, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
He was born into a family that was well known, sure, but they weren't like the top dogs at the time. His rise to power was, well, it was a combination of things, right? You got political maneuvering, military genius, and let's be honest, a whole lot of ambition.
Okay, so he wasn't just handed power, he had to work for it.
Yeah.
So what were some of those key moves that helped him actually rise to the top?
Well, I think one of the smartest moves that he made was forming something called the First Triumvirate.
Hmm. The first triumvirate.
Yeah, so just imagine this. A, a Roman political, like, supergroup, right?
Okay.
And it was made up of Caesar, Pompey, who was a renowned general, and then you have Crassus, who was like a super wealthy influencer. They kind of combined all of their strengths to advance their careers and, well, their agendas.
So it's kind of like a strategic partnership where they all benefited.
Exactly. Each of them brought something unique to the table.
But I know Caesar was also famous for his military campaigns, especially those in Gaul. So what was the significance of those victories?
Yeah, so those campaigns, which took place from 58 to 50 BCE, they were really pivotal for Caesar's rise. And it wasn't just about military glory. They were about, strategic expansion and really just demonstrating these incredible leadership skills that he had.
Right.
Caesar went and conquered vast territories. He brought back just massive amounts of wealth to Rome. And probably most importantly, he won the hearts of the people.
So those victories, they weren't just about expanding the empire, were they?
Yeah.
It was about boosting Caesar's popularity back home.
Right. I'd like that whole thing, winning the public over with bread and circuses, except in this case, you're replacing circuses with military triumphs.
I like that.
Yeah. And, those victories really cemented Caesar's image as this powerful leader and a symbol of Roman might. But this is where things start to get a bit complicated. See, the Senate, which was the governing body of the Roman Republic, they started to see Caesar's growing power as a threat.
Of course. It's like that saying, the higher you climb, the harder you fall.
Huh.
So how did the Senate actually try to put the brakes on Caesar's ambitions?
Okay, so in 49 BCE, the Senate was feeling more and more uneasy about Caesar's popularity and all of his influence.
Mm.
So they ordered him to actually disband his army and just come back to Rome as a private citizen.
Uh,
Essentially, they were trying to strip him of his power.
Talk about a power struggle. So how did Caesar react to that? Did he just give in and quietly retire?
Well, not exactly. Instead, Caesar decided to do something incredibly daring. He crossed the Rubicon River with his legions.
Whoa.
Yeah, and this was like a direct challenge to the Senate's authority and basically a declaration of civil war.
Wow, crossing the Rubicon. It's one of those historical moments that's become synonymous with taking this really decisive, irreversible action. It's like saying game on.
Right.
But was it a calculated risk or a desperate gamble on Caesar's part?
Well, I mean, it was definitely a bold move. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But Caesar, he was a brilliant strategist. He had the unwavering loyalty of all of his troops. And just as importantly, he had the support of the Roman people. So he basically bet on the fact that his popularity would give him the edge that he needed. And he was right.
Wow.
He actually ended up defeating Pompey, who had sided with the Senate and emerged as the undisputed leader of Rome.
So Caesar wins the Civil War, becomes the most powerful man in Rome, but how did the Roman people actually feel about that? I mean, he was technically a dictator, right?
Yeah.
Not exactly in line with the ideals of the Republic.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting. Caesar understood that true power, it wasn't just about military might, It was about winning the hearts and minds of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually did that through a bunch of, well, shrewd political reforms that directly benefited the average Roman. He tackled problems like debt, he redistributed land to those who needed it, and he even expanded citizenship.
So it wasn't just about conquering territories. It was about conquering, like, the hearts of the people.
Exactly.
It sounds like he was playing the long game, making himself indispensable to the average Roman.
Exactly. Caesar was like a master of symbolism. He really understood the power of connecting directly with the people. He knew that happy citizens made for a stable and really supportive base of power. But this is where we start to see the seeds of discontent, especially among the Roman elite. Those senators who were clinging to the ideals of the Republic. They saw his growing power, all of his reforms, and especially him adopting all these symbols that were usually reserved for royalty as like a direct threat to their own authority.
Wait, royalty symbols? Like what? Was he walking around with a crown and a scepter?
Well, not quite,
Okay.
but he was definitely like pushing the boundaries. Imagine this. Statues being built in his honor, his face being put on coins, even him wearing purple robes and a laurel wreath, all these symbols that are typically associated with kings.
Yeah.
To the senators who really believed in the power of the Senate, these were clear signs that Caesar was like aiming for something far beyond just the traditional role of a Roman leader.
Wow. I can only imagine how those senators felt. It's like watching somebody slowly chip away at the very foundation of your power structure.
Yeah.
To them, Caesar wasn't just a powerful leader. He was becoming a threat to the very fabric of the Republic.
You hit the nail on the head. Caesar's actions, while they might have been really popular with the people, were seen as a blatant power grab by those senators who believed in the ideals of shared power, a government by the people. So you have this clash of ideologies, this fundamental difference in how they saw the future of Rome.
Right.
And this really sets the stage for the dramatic events that are about to unfold in the Ides of March.
Okay, so we've got Caesar, this ambitious leader who's making big changes, winning the hearts of the people, but also making some powerful enemies along the way. And then we've got the Senate, increasingly wary, feeling like their power is slipping away. And this is where the story takes a dark turn, because this tension, this power struggle, this is the breeding ground for a conspiracy. And that brings us to the heart of our deep dive, the plot to assassinate Caesar.
And what's so intriguing about this plot is that it wasn't just about politics. It was a tangled web of these personal grudges, these ideological clashes, and even a tragic element of betrayal by those who Caesar considered to be close to him. And this is where we start to understand that the Ides of March wasn't just about politics. It was deeply personal.
And that is where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we uncover the motivations behind the conspiracy, meet the key players involved, and delve into the events leading up to that fateful day in Roman history.
Welcome back. Last time we left off with Rome kind of like teetering on the edge. Caesar was at the peak of his power, but he had also made some pretty powerful enemies. And that friction, that clash between ambition and ideology, well, that's where the plot to actually assassinate him really took root.
It really is fascinating how all of those tensions played out. We tend to think of history as this grand narrative, but when you really dig deeper, you realize that it's driven by these very human emotions. Ambition, jealousy, fear, loyalty, all of that.
Absolutely.
All of that played a part in the events leading up to the Ides of March.
Right. And it's one thing to, disagree with somebody's policies, but to plot their murder, I mean, that's a whole different level. So who were these conspirators and what actually drove them to these like extreme measures? Well, the conspiracy, it involved a group of senators, senators who believed that Caesar had just become too powerful and that he was a threat to the Republic. But the two names that really stand out are Gaius Cassius Longinus and perhaps more importantly, Marcus Junius Brutus.
Okay, so Cassius and Brutus, two names that are forever linked to the assassination of Caesar. So what can you tell us about them? Like, what were their motivations?
Well, Cassius, he was a skilled military leader in his own right.
Yeah.
But some historians, they believe that he harbored this deep resentment towards Caesar. He saw him as this rival who'd overshadowed his own accomplishments. He was really the mastermind behind the conspiracy, the one who rallied all the others to the cause.
So it was like a classic case of maybe rivalry, maybe even a touch of jealousy, ambition, and ego. I mean, they can be powerful motivators.
Right.
But what about Brutus? I thought he was actually close with Caesar.
Yeah, and that's what makes Brutus's involvement so tragic and so complex. He wasn't just a respected senator. He was somebody that Caesar genuinely trusted and actually admired. Some sources even suggest that they may have had a much closer relationship, possibly even a familial one,
Really?
though that's still debated by historians, of course.
Hold on, are we saying that Brutus might have been Caesar's, like, illegitimate son?
Uh-huh.
I mean, that adds a whole other layer of betrayal to this story.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Regardless of what their exact relationship was, it's clear that Caesar had this really deep affection for Brutus. I mean, he even pardoned him after Brutus had fought against him in the Civil War.
Wow.
Imagine that, being on the losing side of a civil war and then being pardoned by the very person that you opposed.
Yeah. It speaks to Caesar's, confidence, maybe even his ability to forgive even when faced with betrayal. But it also makes Brutus's decision to join the conspiracy even more difficult to understand. It's like being torn between your loyalty to a friend or even, a father figure and then your belief in what's best for your country.
Exactly. Brutus was really caught between these two powerful forces. On one hand, you've got his personal loyalty to Caesar, and on the other hand, you've got his really unwavering belief in the ideals of the Roman Republic, this system of government where power was shared, not concentrated in the hands of one person.
Right.
He was convinced by Cassius that Caesar's ambition was leading Rome down a very dangerous path towards tyranny.
So for Brutus, it was about choosing between like his personal loyalty and his political ideals.
Yeah.
It's a dilemma that's echoed throughout, all of history.
It had.
So what ultimately tipped the scales for him?
Well, Brutus, like so many Romans at the time, he was raised on stories about the founding of the Republic.
Yeah.
Mhm. About the struggle to overthrow kings and actually establish this system of shared power. So he truly believed that Caesar's growing power, his disregard for the Senate's authority, was really eroding the very foundation of the Republic. He saw the assassination as a necessary act, almost like a patriotic duty to save Rome from tyranny.
It's tragic in a way.
It is.
Brutus, this idealist, the defender of the Republic, convinced that he had to betray his friend to save the system that he believed in. But I'm curious, how did they even begin to plan something as audacious as assassinating, the most powerful man in Rome?
Right.
Weren't there like bodyguards, loyal troops, some kind of security measures in place?
Well, Caesar, perhaps because he was so confident, or maybe because he really did believe in his own popularity, he wasn't as cautious as you might expect. He moved pretty freely among the people, often without a heavy guard, and this gave the conspirators, well, an opportunity.
So they saw like an opening, a vulnerability,
Yeah.
and they exploited it. But they still needed a plan. So how did they pull it off?
Well, they decided to choose the Senate meeting on March 15th, 44 BCE,
Okay.
the Ides of March. They chose this as the moment to spike.
The Ides of March. It's chilling how a date can become synonymous with betrayal and assassination. Was there like a reason they chose that specific date?
Well, it wasn't just any date. The Ides of March, it already held this certain significance in Roman society.
Okay.
It was a time for settling debts, making offerings to the gods. By choosing this date, the conspirators, well, they really added a layer of symbolism to their actions. They were framing it as this necessary sacrifice for the good of the Republic.
So it wasn't just about killing Caesar. It was about like making a statement, right?
Yeah.
Linking their actions to this sense of historical and even religious significance.
Take that.
But did Caesar have any like inkling of what was coming? Were there any warnings or signs that something was, amiss?
Interestingly enough, there were several warnings, even omens and premonitions leading up to the Ides of March. The most famous, of course, is that story of the soothsayer who supposedly warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. There are even some accounts of Caesar's wife, Calpurnia. She had this really disturbing dream, and she begged him not to go to the Senate that day.
Wait, so there were actual warnings, maybe even signs from the gods, and Caesar just he ignored them.
He did.
Was he that confident in his position, or was he just willfully blind to the danger around him?
Well, it's a question that's fascinated historians for centuries.
Yeah.
Was it arrogance, ambition, or simply this belief in his own destiny that led him to disregard these warnings?
Right.
We can't know for sure, but what we do know is that Caesar, despite all of the warnings, walked right into, I guess you could say, the lion's den that day.
Okay, so the stage is set. The date is chosen. Caesar, despite all the warnings, enters the Senate. He's surrounded by these people who are about to betray him. So take us through what actually happened that day, like the actual assassination itself. Paint a picture for us.
Okay, so imagine the scene, right?
Yeah.
The Senate meeting's underway. Caesar enters, surrounded by all these senators. Some of them are genuinely there to discuss matters of state. Others are hiding their true intentions behind these masks of civility. Then, under the guise of presenting a petition, one of the conspirators, he grabs Caesar's toga,
Okay.
and this is the signal for all the others to attack.
It's almost Shakespearean, the way this unfolds. You can practically feel the tension, that sense of impending doom in the air. How many conspirators were there, and how did Caesar react? Did he fight back?
Well, it's believed that there were upwards of 60 senators involved in the conspiracy, though the actual attack involved a much smaller group. And according to those historical accounts, Caesar did initially try to defend himself. He even drew his sword. But, imagine his shock, his disbelief when he sees Brutus among his attackers.
And that's where we get that famous line, right? Et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus. It's such a powerful statement, capturing that shock and pain of betrayal by somebody you trust. Did he really say those words?
Well, whether or not those exact words were actually spoken is still debated, but I mean, the sentiment definitely rings true.
Yeah.
Seeing Brutus, somebody he'd pardoned, somebody he considered close, among his assassins, I mean, it must have been just a devastating blow. Some accounts say that after seeing Brutus, Caesar actually stopped resisting. Maybe he accepted his fate, or maybe he was just heartbroken by that ultimate betrayal.
It's hard to even imagine a more dramatic scene. This powerful Caesar, surrounded, betrayed by the very people he trusted, falling victim to this flurry of stab wounds in the very heart of Roman power. It's a moment that has really resonated throughout history, right?
It has.
The stark reminder of the fragility of power and the human capacity for betrayal.
And it raises the question, did the conspirators actually achieve their goal? Did they succeed in saving the Republic by removing Caesar from power? Or did they just unleash this new wave of chaos and violence that would ultimately further erode the very ideals that they were trying to protect?
Okay, so we're back and we're picking up right where we left off. Caesar, betrayed and assassinated in the Senate. The conspirators, they thought they were saving the Republic, but did their actions actually do that?
Well, that's where the whole Ides of March thing takes a really ironic turn. You see, instead of saving the Republic, the assassination actually kind of sped up its demise. It created this power vacuum, it ignited this public fury, and ultimately it really just paved the way for the rise of the Roman Empire. Sometimes, the best of intentions can lead to some pretty bad outcomes.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be careful what you wish for. The conspirators got what they wanted, but at what cost? So what happened in the aftermath?
Well, remember how we talked about Caesar's, his popularity with the common people?
Yes.
Well, when he died, it sparked this widespread, grief and outrage. Imagine the leader who brought stability, who enacted these reforms that benefited them, who really embodied Roman strength, suddenly he's gone, brutally murdered by the very people who were supposed to represent them.
It's like pulling the rug out from under the people who would put all their trust in Caesar.
Right.
The conspirators must have just totally underestimated how popular he really was.
They absolutely did. And this is where Mark Antony comes into the picture. Caesar's his loyal lieutenant.
Huh?
He was a shrewd politician, a gifted orator. Antony, he saw an opportunity here to kind of seize control of the whole narrative.
Okay, so Antony was no stranger to, power plays himself. Didn't he actually use Caesar's funeral to his advantage?
He did. Just think about it. You've got this grieving public all gathered to mourn their fallen leader, and Antony takes center stage. He delivers this masterful speech that totally turns the tide of public opinion.
Ah, yes. The famous "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears" speech. The one they teach in every drama class.
That's the one. And Antony, he was a master at manipulating emotions. He reminded the crowd of all of Caesar's accomplishments, his generosity towards the people, and he contrasted all of that with the brutality of his murder.
Right.
He even displayed Caesar's blood-soaked toga. It was powerful stuff.
Yeah.
He turned their grief into anger, their sorrow into this thirst for revenge.
It's like watching a masterclass in rhetoric and crowd manipulation.
Right.
So Antony basically turned the assassins from heroes into villains, overnight. What happened to the conspirators? Did they manage to escape all the fallout?
Not a chance.
Okay.
The public wanted revenge, and Antony, well, he was fueled by their anger and his own ambition. He was ready to take advantage of the chaos.
So did Rome, descend into anarchy? Was there nobody left to pick up the pieces?
Well, Antony, he pretty quickly formed what's called the Second Triumvirate. He joined forces with Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, and Lepidus, another powerful figure. And their goal, well, it was simple. They wanted to avenge Caesar's death and crush the opposition.
Okay.
It was a time of, well, a lot of political maneuvering. You had alliances that were forged and then broken, and ultimately more bloodshed.
So the assassination, instead of, restoring peace and stability, it actually just ignited another power struggle. I mean, history's full of unintended consequences, isn't it?
It definitely is. And this new triumvirate, they were just as ambitious and power hungry as the individuals they replaced.
Right.
They hunted down the conspirators, defeated them in a series of battles, but this wasn't about restoring the republic anymore. It was about consolidating power.
Mm-hmm.
And as often happens when you've got these ambitious individuals who are sharing power, the alliance, well, it eventually fractured.
Ah, the age-old story of too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
So who ultimately came out on top?
Well, in the end, it was Octavian who emerged victorious.
Right.
He defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, and with his rivals eliminated, Octavian, later known as Augustus, became the first emperor of Rome.
So the Ides of March, this act that was meant to save the Republic, it ended up paving the way for its complete transformation into an empire
Yeah.
ruled by a single person. I mean, talk about irony.
It really is. It's a stark reminder that even the actions we take with the very best intentions can have these unforeseen and often devastating consequences.
Yeah.
It also highlights, I think, a really crucial leadership lesson, which is understanding the long-term implications of our actions.
This is where the Ides of March kind of stops being just history and starts offering some pretty serious leadership lessons, right? I mean, even if we're not Roman senators plotting assassinations, there's a lot we can all learn from this whole saga.
Absolutely. The story of Caesar and the Ides of March, it's like a treasure trove of these timeless lessons about leadership, trust, power, and the dangers of, short-sighted decision-making.
So let's unpack some of those lessons. What are the key takeaways here that we can actually apply to our own lives, our own leadership challenges?
Well, I think first and foremost, trust it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
Caesar trusted Brutus maybe too much,
Yeah.
and it ultimately led to his downfall. So as a leader, it's crucial to really assess not just someone's competence, but also their motives
Yeah.
and their potential for betrayal.
Right. So building a strong team is essential, but so is really understanding the dynamics within that team.
Absolutely.
So what else kind of stands out to you?
Well, I think humility is often overlooked as a leadership quality, but it's crucial.
Okay.
Caesar's love of all those power symbols and his disregard for the Senate, it alienated those who could have been his allies.
Right.
Leaders today can learn from that,
Mm.
sharing credit, acknowledging the contributions of others, and building consensus.
Right.
These can go a long way in preventing resentment and actually fostering a much more collaborative environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nobody wants to feel like they're being sidelined or ignored.
Ah.
Any other key takeaways that come to mind?
Um, well, I think paying attention to warning signs is huge.
Okay.
Caesar, he received all those warnings and omens, but he dismissed them. He was blinded by his own confidence or maybe his ambition. Leaders today, they really need to be open to feedback, even if it's, critical or uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most valuable insights come from those who are willing to challenge our assumptions.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to step outside of our own echo chambers and really listen to different perspectives. Anything else you think is important to highlight?
Well, I think forgiveness is a powerful tool, but it needs to be genuine. It can't just be like a strategic maneuver. Caesar pardoned Brutus, but we can't know for sure whether it was true forgiveness or just this calculated move to try to maintain control.
Right.
Leaders need to understand that forgiveness, when it's genuine, it can really build trust and loyalty. But when it's used as like a manipulation tactic, well, it can backfire pretty spectacularly.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. It really shows how the Ides of March it's more than just a date in a history book.
It is.
It's a story that's just packed with all these timeless lessons about leadership and trust and power and even the human element of betrayal.
Exactly. And even though it happened, all those centuries ago, it still resonates with us today because it speaks to these fundamental human dynamics that are, well, they're as relevant now as they were back then.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from Caesar's rise and fall to the conspiracy, the assassination, and the really chaotic aftermath that shaped the course of Roman history. The story that's both fascinating and well, pretty cautionary.
It certainly is, and it reminds us that even the most powerful figures, they can fall victim to their own ambitions, their miscalculations, and even the betrayals of those they trust.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Ides of March, I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing these lessons from the past, how might you navigate these kinds of challenges in your own life?
Yeah.
What kind of leader do you want to be? Food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Ides of March. We'll catch you next time.